Okay, fantastic. Well, welcome to the Designing Music Now podcast. My name is Dale Crowley, and
This is Lawson Madlener.
today we are very honored to have Mike Peaslee, the co-founder and director of operations at Soundiron. He is also a sound manipulation and instrument design junkie with a love and a knack for recording anything and everything he sees. He co-founded and co-owned Tone Hammering from its inception in 2008 to its closing in 2011. Prior to that, he served for nearly 9 years as in-house sound designer for Crystal Dynamics, working on Tomb Raider series, a whole bunch of them, and also games like, he was a lead sound designer for games like Snowblind, Mad Dash, Legacy of Kain series, Whiplash, and Soul Reaver 2, which is, that's also a Legacy of Kain series. So fantastic video games, incredible resume there. Also, he's worked on games like Battle Stations Midway, and others. And Mike specializes in virtual instrument and instrument sample library development, field recording, studio production, recording, post-production, sound design, and Foley. He's also a skilled cinematic post-production sound designer, mixing, and he does mixing and scoring, as well as voice directing and acting for film, video games, and animation. He's also a reasonably decent vocalist and a percussionist and an avid studio construction and audio hardware and software research nerd.
Dang.
Well, and a lot of that stuff, I mean, these days with Soundiron, it's our core work is really just all about sound libraries. So for the most, I mean, although we do videos and demos and things like that, that kind of tap into all those different sort of disciplines. But for the most part, I think for the last 7, 8 years now, this has been like all day, every day, just making instruments.
Fantastic. So before we dive into Soundiron, the company, and so on, let's get a little bit more about your background, though, because that is very fascinating, especially to the video game composers that are listening. So can you tell us about how you got started and maybe some of your earliest memories about music?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was kind of I got started out of a down this road out of a sense of almost desperation because I didn't really have any formal education in sound, but I was always obsessed with it. I was in bands throughout high school. I was in marching band, and when I was a little kid, I used to run around with a tape recorder and record myself banging on the piano and doing all sorts of other things. So that sort of laid the groundwork. I started studying radio in junior college and got kind of my first taste of real audio engineering there. Got a 4-track at home and some pretty lousy microphones and equipment, and slowly muddled my way through experimenting. I was raised in plumbing. My dad owned a plumbing company, so throughout my 20s, I had a plumbing truck with me at all times in my driveway as my day job, and so I basically just used that as my instrument locker. You know, I'd pull out tools and parts and scrap metal, and that was a good way of building a kind of an ad hoc drum kit. And I liked the sound of just using unusual objects as sound sources. And from there, doing band recording, like self-recording bands I was in, I kind of developed my production chops, and then was taken in first as a game tester for a few months at Crystal Dynamics, and then was able to kind of harass the lead sound department head, Greg Shaw. I think he's at Microsoft now, to let me be an intern or kind of an apprentice, and worked my way up from there pretty quickly just because I never went home.
That sounds fantastic. I also got started sort of in game QA and things like that. I think it's a great way. People don't realize that. Just get any job you can in a game company, and then you can work your way up from there. So
yeah, I mean, it's because it's that you're sort of in their face. You can kind of make yourself useful and helpful, and it's a lot easier than cold calling or sending your resume into some company that has no idea who you are.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Lawson.
I was going to say, so it's interesting. You say, so you don't really have an educational background in music, but you're so successful in this. And I know a lot of people are like, you have to be fully educated in this, but you seem to have mostly taught yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I sort of piecemeal education. You know, I took drum lessons and guitar lessons and piano lessons as a kid and a teenager. I was in marching band. I was never really exceptional at any of those instruments, and still am not. Probably a better drummer and singer than anything else now, just because that's the thing I I hung on to the most. But everything was sort of self-taught. I had interned at a recording studios and radio stations while I was studying at a junior college. But as soon as it was like a weird instinct I had where as soon as I felt like I kind of knew as much as I needed to know, I would start pounding the pavement to see if I could find an opportunity for that. But honestly, really, it was getting that video game testing job and showing what I could do as far as a work ethic, and sort of my level of discipline as an employee there that sort of showed that I could handle whatever they threw at me. And then I was doing a lot of music production on my own, making my own music in I believe at the time it was Cakewalk and Fruity Loops, now Sonar and FL Studio. But back then so I used that to kind of create a demo reel. But honestly, I think it was the fact that I would just constantly be there and be in the sound, kind of hovering around the sound department, asking and hoping for an opportunity. And the test manager there also gave me sort of like a good recommendation.
So you worked on a wide variety of games there. Tell us about some that you liked that were, a particular experience or something, maybe in recording or working on some of those Tomb Raider games or something.
The first one was honestly the most important, and that was I think at the time it was Mad Dash.
Mm-hmm.
It was done concurrently with some of the Legacy of Kain games, but nobody in the sound department was on that. We had, I think, 2 or 3 games in the pipe at the time there, so they basically threw me in after only like 5-6 months of experience as in charge of doing all the sound design and sound implementation in Engine. So I was doing cinematic audio, in-game audio, and creation of the sounds. A lot of the voiceover recording and editing I had to handle, and it gave me just a crash course, and I loved it. So I did that, and then it was easy to kind of roll on to the other projects, and I just took as much of the content into my own hands as I could. I didn't like using at the time, the sound libraries that were available. They felt dated. They felt like they'd been used all up in years and years of, because some of those libraries, even the well-recorded ones, were 30, 40 years old. And you just felt played out. I'd heard all of those sounds in movies many times, and everybody else had. So I felt like I was kind of doing a disservice to the people playing our games if all I was doing was just regurgitating the same thing they'd heard before. And I didn't like the idea that games had this reputation of being low production value, kind of cheap imitations of a sort of a film experience. I felt like all it took was a little bit of ingenuity to fit it into RAM, because there were a lot of RAM limitations, especially back then in early 2000s. But I felt like, things like Round Robin really began for me there, like footsteps, gunshots, Foley sounds, all that needed variation. And not only variation where if you play the sounds same, over and over, you would hear variations between it, but also aggregate sounds, so that each component of a larger sound would be randomized, so that, say, a big event on screen, like an explosion where a big machine falls apart, that should be lots of different sounds happening discretely from throughout the animation, not just one single sprite sound effect.
Right.
And that was really where I kind of started hunting that down and getting into field recording, first with I think the first digital recorder I got was a Marantz DAT recorder, and then a stereo Audio Technica mic, little single point stereo, and kind of quickly outgrew those. The first good mic I got for field recording was a Rode NT4. I think it still stands up pretty well to this day.
It does, yeah. It's still used a lot in production.
And I used that. Then I switched to an Fostex FR2 and then an FR2 LE, and that was really where Tonehammer kicked in. Basically, I was spending all my money on hardware, but I was spending a lot of time, also trying to figure out the best hardware, because for me, noise was just the devil. I hated feeling like I couldn't get that sound that you'd hear real pro engineers able to achieve, and so I kept hunting down the best gear that I could for what I could spend, and found the Fostex FR2 and FR2 LE as great starting points. And then from there, adopted a Sony PCM D50, which is awesome. It's got a mic set up about as good as the NT4, but with a built-in recording and an awesome battery life. I beat the crap out of that recorder too. Dropped it in a frozen lake. Got it
Oh,
done up,
goodness.
Dang.
brainstorm. I mean, it's just I basically have submerged it underwater and it still works. I have not managed to break it after like 7, 8 years now.
Wow, that's impressive.
Highly recommend the Sony PCM
Yeah.
D50 and D100 series.
I just bought the Tascam one, the 44RL with wireless, so I can control it from my phone.
Nice.
And
I haven't really had a look at that because I haven't managed to break the recorder I have. So I haven't been in the market for a new one in a while. But yeah, for our actual sessions, that kind of gear hunt, because I was trying to get. I mean, I wanted to do our own Foley. I wanted to do our own creature sounds, so I started getting into that. Because I'd been singing in bands for a long time. I was in a band called Stalking Tom. I think our MP3s are still floating around out there. And
Cool.
so I got into voiceover because I had to direct it a bunch to get it into our, you know, like say, first it was like basic stuff like character combat voices, you know, soldiers like, you know, like flank 'em and, you know, like grenade, all that kind of crap that the NPCs would yell in game. That was sort of me and the other guys in our sound department first, and then eventually, you know, some of the more serious characters would be people we brought into the studio. So those were great experiences to develop an ability to handle recording sessions with external talent, and how to do field recording and Foley in weird environments.
Yeah.
And that
Very.
led to, you know, that also rolled into music. I wanted to also do the same and replace, you know, like I'm a terrible piano player, but I love the piano. I was more of a sequencing kind of person. I liked really sequencing complicated arrangements, and so sampling was like the best way to do that, to get something that sounded live and real without needing to really be a good player and just having to mic up the instrument right there on the spot. And that kind of predicated my whole journey into sampling instruments.
Right. Tell us about that journey. Tell us about how, you know, what was your first sample library, perhaps, that you worked on, and where did it go from? How did it go from there?
I think the first fully formed sample instrument was probably the old busted granny piano, and that was it was in our living room. Me and my roommates, one of which was in the sound department at Crystal, and another one of which ended up being a guy who worked with us for a while at Tonehammer. It was just in our living room, and so it was broken, completely all messed up, several broken strings, a lot of broken hammers, and it sounded awesome. It's just really clunky. People would, you know, we'd always jam on it, you know, in the living room with, you know, guitars and drums, and that piano would just had a lot of character. So I got in there with Anti-4 and sampled it, and then programmed it. That was the first fully formed instrument, and then from there it was just one after another. It was just, all right, well that worked. I'm gonna get any instrument I had, and then anything I could get my hands on, any object. I started realizing that a lot of the Foley sounds and object sounds I'd been recording could also be played as instruments if you programmed into Contact. And I gradually, out of need, you know, first I recorded it, then all right, well I need to program it, so I'd figured out how to do it in Contact, and then I wasn't happy with the sort of default settings, and so I was trying to say, well, what could I do? Because once you're used to doing that in a sound engine in a game, the idea of adjusting, say, EQ based on impact velocity or any of those sorts of modular enhancements, ways of attenuating and manipulating down based on user input or behavior, then you realize, wow, Contact's an awesome platform for doing that. You're not just triggering a sound when you hit a key press. You can set up all sorts of behaviors. And
Right.
from there, you know, it was just one, you know, constantly building on that knowledge base. And then at the time, I was doing those kinds of experiments. Trolls Fullman, the composer at Crystal, he'd come to join the Crystal sound department, and he and I had kind of a common view of that we should just be able to get all of our own sounds and do all sorts of great things. And so we launched Tonehammer, and it worked really well. I mean, it took off, and it gave us the opportunity to do that all the time. So we moved away from games and just started making instruments full time. First individual instruments, and then ensembles, and then full choirs. And we each had our own kind of different style and goals. in the direction we want to take. So at a certain point, we branched off, and Greg Stevens, who had also been at Crystal as a sound engineer, he came with, and Chris Marshall, who is our programmer, our audio programmer here. He had been, he had started developing scripts and tools at Tonehammer sort of toward the end. So he came with us to Soundiron. The three of us are the owners of Soundiron.
Right.
And we've got a few other guys now that recently have joined up in different capacities to sort of complete a good full team. So we're basically like a functioning, self-contained sound department.
So that's fantastic about how you started in games and used all of the game knowledge that you had to start sampling and then develop Tonehammer. And then Soundiron has just grown extensively from there. You've got a massive set of libraries. We're going to be talking about three in particular. We're going to be talking about Apocalypse Epic Percussion Ensemble, which is just amazing in terms of its ability to just deliver epic sounding drums and percussion, great for video games. The Mercury Boys Choir and some of your choral stuff as well. And then this sort of new area where you're getting into the Symphony series brass ensemble. So we'll talk about each one of those separately. Can you tell us what was your, let's start with the Apocalypse Epic Percussion Ensemble. What was your inspiration for that?
Well, we had started back at Tonehammer. We'd done what we called epic drum libraries, where we would gather every drum we, in a certain category we get, and pick a hall, a location. Often the same church we used for Mars and Venus and the Mercury Boys Choir, and we would record as a group. So we'd all play together. We'd all be on a click, and play in unison. Lots of bloody hands, lots of broken drumsticks, lots of broken drums. But that was the point. It was because everything we've done over the years, a lot of the sort of new directions we've tackled were problem solving. We didn't like the way that drums sounded, that were available at the time. We thought that trailer drums and big cinematic drums and just the idea of big powerful drums were sorely lacking. We needed more power, so we would use two drumsticks or big mallets or something like that, and just as a whole group bash the shit out of drums, and really trying to also get a very dynamic playability from very soft to very loud. Basically, we were trying to replicate what we imagined in our mind good kind of war drums would sound like, and in the early ones, I think there was Epic Tom Ensemble, Epic Dole, and Frame. We kept evolving the idea with, but there were a lot of problems still left unsolved. With Ape Apocalypse Percussion Ensemble, basically the idea was, well, let's just, this was, and now it's Soundiron, let's build something that kind of captures all of that we've learned over the years. So, now we've got 3 mic positions instead of just 1, so you could choose your distance from the instrument. We refined our actual miking technique to get a nice dry sound in the close mic, so you could really get that present bassy oomph. But you could also get that distant kind of almost foreboding kind of sound from the far mics. And also we wanted a wider variety of different instruments and a wider variety of articulations. So I think it's got over, how many different drums? It's dozens and dozens of drums. I think we still have most of them except for the ones that were destroyed in the process. Yeah, basically that was the thought behind it. And then from there we kept, the first edition of it was very straightforward, but we went back and added a whole, MIDI playback and grooves. We added, we went back to our source audio and made it fully 3 mic positions. Before it had been kind of mostly 2 mic positions. So we remixed it to give that much more freedom, and expanded it with some cymbals and some other things. So now it's a 25 gigabyte library, and I'm trying to think how much session time went into it. I think a week of solid studio time, or I don't call it studio time, but it was at a hall, and an ungodly amount of editing and post-production.
But you also have recorded a bunch of professional drummers and recording a lot of MIDI things that they've, basically. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's just a really tremendous time saver for creating really epic sounding, tribal sounding
Yeah.
and other kinds of. You've got all different styles from the different people that you sampled. Tell us about some of the people that you brought into the studio for that.
Well, actually, we let them work from home.
Cool.
And because the best way to get good, either they were composed. A lot of our we have a nice big group of beta composers, basic composers we work with on a almost weekly basis. Some of them have been with us for like almost 5 years now. And they're really talented composers, and amongst them a lot of drummers too. So we basically put the call out to them, and they each provided us a lot of awesome material to start with, and we're also looking to expand on that soon as well to get even more content to, because a lot of the stuff is great with a lot of our different libraries. It's usually you'd sort of think of something like that as being meant for one library, but really once you've transposed it, a really good groove can often translate really well across a variety of different percussion arrangements.
Excellent. Go ahead, Lawson.
Oh, I was just gonna say, out of that Apocalypse Percussion, do you have any favorite patches on that? Because they're all so different. Except, I mean, you have the overall ensemble patch, which is great. I love just all hands on the keyboard, load up mics,
Exactly.
all hands, just smashing it down. It's fantastic.
It's awesome.
But is that your favorite? Do you have like some specific patches on there that you just really, really like?
That is my favorite, the all patch. I'd say second favorite would be the bass toms or the bass drums.
Cool.
Although I'm a sucker for snare drums, so the full snare drum preset, including ensemble snare drum, and then I think 6 individual snare drums.
Oh, nice.
That's also a lot of fun to play if you're a big fan of snares. Snares are really well covered in Ape.
Yeah, definitely. I like how there's also that the ethnic percussion in there, because you wouldn't think it would always be in there, and then you just load up just the close mics on it, and it just all of a sudden, it doesn't even sound like, it sounds like you got a whole new library, and it's like it's fantastic.
And and something that early on we realized was that if we shape ADSR well, since we tend to mic more closely than most other libraries, and for our close mics, regardless of whether it's a human voice or it's a drum, we use large diaphragm studio mics, and we get them right, basically as close as we can to the instrument without overpowering the mic. But we use mics with pretty decent SPL handling capability. So
Nice.
what that means is, especially in something like Ape, if you dial down the release knob on the UI, you basically have a dry studio sound,
Right.
a close mic dry studio sound, and that was really important to us because it takes an instrument that it's all percussion, but it doesn't have to be. You can use it. Greg Stevens, our partner, he likes making it into a drum kit and dialing it as a rock drum kit. You dial down the release and map it to say V drums, and you just have this really fat sounding drum kit.
Wow. That's
Plus, you
impressive.
can
I'm gonna have to try
import
that.
addictive drums and easy drummer and things like that if you've created that ability to use their mapping in your tool as well, which is really great.
Yeah, it makes it really handy. I mean, we have a sort of a standard map from low to high, but we also have it so you can import your own. You can either create your own maps to put any instrument anywhere you want on the keyboard, or use some standard ones like some of Native Instruments maps and things like that.
Well, that's one thing I've noticed about all of your libraries is they're highly customizable. I mean, you can play them out of the box, but then you have so much range of control over almost every aspect of the instrument, to the point where you can use it to sound design the instruments. You can change where the attack is going to come in, where the sample starts, all of those kinds of features which you don't normally see.
Yeah, I mean, I think those are really important. For us, the idea, because we'd want those features, and I think a lot of people do too. You don't have to use them, but we learned that using offset is a great way of especially dynamically, you can take something that, an ensemble percussion strike that's a little flammy, and tighten it. You can take something like, say, a brass note, and if you want that natural kind of rise in or kind of lip sound, the start of the note, you can have that natural lag, or if you need to play quickly, you can tighten it up with the offset knob. in the Symphony series brass that that is really, really handy. That feature, to especially when you're working with staccatos, you can make them really tight, or you can make them nice and kind of fleshed out.
Yeah, let's talk about Symphony Series Brass. What was your inspiration for that? And it is a full ensemble. It is a symphonic. I think it's one of the first real symphonic libraries that you guys have done. Or do you plan others?
Yeah, if you don't, I mean, I would say the choirs were the first symphonic instruments,
but
I mean, getting into the orchestral instruments, we started with the brass concept. Really the idea was we liked the way we had approached the choirs, and the idea there being it's very modular, very flexible and customizable. We wanted to push the brass even further and basically take some of the lessons we've learned in types of articulations and modularity in articulations to allow blending and combining and stitching them together, and do it from the bottom up with the brass ensemble. We also, really, believed in the idea of a big sound. We'll probably circle back at some point in the future and get an ensemble, like kind of a small ensemble, maybe a very small brass section down the road, or something more like a brass band. But for this goal, we wanted something just glorious. We wanted something that would really kind of fit that John Williams sound. Before going into the sessions, we listened to a lot of Raiders of the Lost Ark and a lot of Star Wars, and that was really for us the sort of personal goal, was to create this massive sound. So every section has got 8 players. It makes the tuba sound ridiculously huge, but it's not overpowering either. It fits. It's a really full, fat, wide stereo sound, and it's a very generally dynamic library. We got a lot of special effect articulations in addition to the bread and butter sustained staccatos, and we also did a lot of things like we have simulated legato for any of the sustaining presets that uses some unique modeled fundamental behavior. So when you're transitioning between notes, it does that natural subtle stair step that you get from a real brass instrument as the air column is changing. But that's just so any articulation, sustaining articulation we have, you can play legato with either slur or standard flip. We also recorded true legato for sustains, so you can get that really natural sound. We started with the idea of the natural legato first and foremost, but we realized, well, can we do it for everything? And we found that you really basically could, and it turned out really well. And we've gone even further over the last year to sort of further refine that theory.
Yeah, it sounds really good, and also the fact that you can turn that on and off as a user. That's another user-defined feature. Another thing that I really like are the repetitions. How you can set up 8th note, 16th note triplets, 8th and 16th note triplets, and you can have that. It sounds really great on the staccato, but it's also really good for a crescendo. You get a ta-ta-ta-ta as it goes up and so on. So
exactly.
The other thing I love about your interface is how it shows the wave of the whether it's a decrescendo or a crescendo. You can see the response as it's going along.
Yeah.
And they're tempo synced for the individual instruments. You can sync
if you want them to be, yeah.
So you thought of everything.
That's probably our strength and our weakness. We never run out of ideas. Our programmer Chris, the running joke, he's like, when I say, all right, we've got a great tempo, he's like, no, you're going to ask for more. You will ask for more, and we do. Although he's one to talk, he usually comes up with crazy new ideas, like the whole simulated legato system in brass. That was just his idea. He just said, oh, by the way, I made this new system. Try it out.
Wow.
And you're saying you use some modeling to help you with that?
We could start modeling, but it's basically a scripted mixture between parameter changes to the waves. We were adjusting all sorts of things, whether it's pitch, triggering releases, and a lot of fading. But it's all scripted using the sample content in the library, manipulating it to replicate the behavior that is happening in real life. We basically did a lot of A/B comparisons between the actual legato we recorded to figure out what is actually happening, And we started that process actually, I think 6 months before we recorded the brass. We got an orchestrator and trumpet player, and spent a lot of time with him planning out first figuring out the physical properties of the instrument and what we could learn from that might sort of push aside any preconceived notions we have, to really try to understand the physics of the instrument and what we could do with it, and then try to translate that into what we could do in script and in group settings and in wave manipulation of the sample content as well. Because if you were to try to record true legato with every possible articulation, you'd be in session for months.
Yeah.
It's the slowest, longest part of it, but it was also very important to get. It just, we realized after recording true legato, why can't we have legato for everything? And why can't we also choose between gliss and standard keyed legato? And why can't we allow you to choose the speed of the transition and the intensity of the transition? And in the end, it's basically a really flexible, user customizable, and automatable system. So.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about some of my favorite parts of this, which are the cluster effects and all of the aleatoric-like recordings that you did on the brass instruments. This in video games is really important, with composers like Gary Scheinman and Jason Graves, and we're seeing it more and more in video games, especially horror or space-based games. Tell me about what was your design philosophy? Was that a lot of fun in recording all those instruments and telling the players to do crazy stuff?
Yeah. And it was actually more challenging than it was with the vocalist, because now you're sort of working. With a vocalist, you can kind of just make any sound, and they're usually used to. With our vocalists for our choirs, we worked with Bob Geary and Volti, who do a lot of experimental choral work. So they were they basically were able to do a lot of improv effects. They already had a whole repertoire of some cool stuff that under their up their sleeves that we could just draw on. With the brass, we had to basically we would sound it out verbally and say, can you make this sound? And also they would show us what they could do, what each instrument was capable of that nobody really ever talked about what knew. Like the coolest thing was the sort of sonar bass pings for the tuba. Our tuba soloist surprised us with it. He said, well, I can do this thing. I don't know many other tuba players who can, but I can, and then he just did it. And like, whoa, that's awesome! It's like, like this weird. You'd have to hear it in the library. It's in the solo tuba effects section.
It really is what sets your library apart, and it's really hard to find those kind of aleatoric effects out in the sample library world. So
they're also great to break up sessions. We use them to kind of intersperse between the more basic articulations that usually are tiring for the players, because you never really think about that. But they've got to hold a note for a really long time and be very accurate and work all together as a group. Yeah. So sometimes you got to break up the sessions with aleatoric stuff.
A lot of people, when it first came out and they saw the GUI, they were like, "Wow, this is absolutely beautiful." And I thought that too. I was just like, "Wow, I've never seen a GUI at all like this. It just looks amazing." And who came up with that? Who designed it? Because if you go under the hood, it's so complex. But just that first look, just the overview tab, it's just beautiful.
That was all Native Instruments design team. When we'd been kind of discussing brass with NI for a little while, and when we actually produced the sessions, we met together with them and came up with a common vision of what we wanted this monster to be, and so we worked with them as the official publisher for the Symphony series brass library, to kind of kick that whole series off, and they, so over a period of development, as we worked on, like, all right, so what should here are the articulations, here are the features and controls we need. How do you want it to flow? How do you want it to fit so that the user has a very intuitive path to navigate through it? Something that complicated by design, it needs to be, so it can do so much. That required a lot of collaboration between us and Frank Elting there and Christian Werm. I don't want to butcher his name. Washmuth?
Okay.
I wouldn't know how to pronounce it either. I can't pronounce any names properly.
So let's move on to the third library that we'll be reviewing for you, which is the Mercury Boys Choir. It's part of your Olympic or Olympus choir, which is a symphonic choir.
So yeah, when you were recording, did you always have an idea that you were going to do a boys choir, or did you want to do the original symphonic choir? Then you weren't sure how that was going to be reacted by audience, like would it be a good idea? And then you were like, okay, that was good, we're going to do boys, or were you like, yes, we're doing a boys, and you just had to take some time to finish up the first two?
Well, so the choirs thing was just something that we're all about. And the first off, there was Requiem, which was the first big project at Tonehammer. And that was actually recorded at St. Paul's, which is where we recorded the Symphony Series brass. That was a great learning experience and a great sounding library, but it left us with so many questions like, well, what about this and what about that? Well, what if we do this and well, can we get that too? And realize, oh, let's do it truly, a full Divisi library instead of this meshed male and female ensemble, because a lot of times people want to do interplay between the two sections. And so first we recorded the Mars Men's Choir as just this really elaborate male choir. We recorded a lot of Russian content, a lot of Latin content, and then a lot of pure vowels, and then
Ton of true legato.
I think we did three soloists, tons of true legato, and developed that. And kind of that was that started out with the desire to get a kind of a more Gregorian or Russian choir, and then we decided let's just make it a full symphonic choir, symphonic men's choir. And then of course we needed to do Venus to get the female version of that, so that they could blend together. Right before that, we did back at Tonehammer, we did the Libris girls choir. But my goal, I always wanted to do a classic English boy choir, and we just didn't. Bob Geary, he also runs a school in Piedmont, California, and they have a children's course there, but it's mostly girls. And we'd been working with him on Requiem, and went on to work with him on Mars and Venus, and some of our other projects as well. And so that's kind of that was the first stop. When Tonehammer split up, that one went to ADO, and I really was like, all right, well, this is the opportunity we have to really get what I had always wanted, which is just a really much more nuanced boy choir. And also it gave us a chance to say, well, what didn't we get right with the first time around with the girls' choir? What can we do? What other articulations can we get? What can we do to improve the whole process, improve the noise floor? We got better equipment. We switched to Sound Devices recorder 788 solid state recorders, and we kind of pushed aside some of our outmoded mics and went to an all Neumann rig. So everything is just all Neumann. They're all in the TLM series. I think 14 of them now.
Wow. I bet that set you back.
Yeah, I mean, but for us, it was sort of more of the idea of you want a moonshot, you gotta do it right.
Yeah.
It was.
Yeah, I totally agree.
I mean, there are other mics that are good too, but yeah. So I mean, for us, it was just a necessity. We work from home, so in my mind, it kind of harkened back to plumbing. Where you have the tools you'd need, and they'd be these rugged tools and equipment, and it just, you can't do the job without them.
Yeah.
Right.
And so for us, the rig was crucial, and we're engineers. I mean, we're sample developers, but first and foremost, we started out as engineers, and so everything for us is a very hands-on thing, and so we're really picky about the gear down to the cables. So we only use Canary. Honestly, I don't know how to pronounce that either. I've never heard it said out loud. I'd say it's Canary or Conair or Canair. It's this Japanese brand of cable. They put out something called Star Quad, which is double shielded. So really good for long cable runs where there might be potential for RF.
So you've essentially got a production sound rig that you take and you record in spaces like the church and other places, right?
Yeah, anywhere. Like if we record in a recording studio, we don't use any of their gear. We bring it all. There's no reason to use any of their stuff. One of the reasons we use the rigs we do is we're really picky about we we want to give a really pure, natural, and complete sound, because the end user should be the one who decides how they mix it. We don't. It's not flat by. I mean, we do post-produce and shape it, but for us, the starting point was crucial. So maximum headroom, maximum, minimal noise floor. Sometimes if you're recording in a weird place to get a unique sound, you can't help it. If you're under a freeway overpass, but that's where the cool sound is. That's what it is.
Yeah.
You know, you're just, but we're something. But we didn't want our gear to be our Achilles heel. So, we got the tools that we felt were the best for the job, and they have lasted. So, we got mics that are old and well worn, but they just keep doing their job. And the Sound Devices units have just flawless preamps, really, really high headroom, no noise really, and you can take them anywhere. So
cool. Two of my favorite features of the Mercury Boys Choir. One is how, and I suppose this is in all of your choirs, how you have two different articulations, and you can I guess have all of A or all of B. You can merge between them. You can crossfade, and is it a crossfade, or how does it work? You can have A's and O's. You can have a staccato. You can have a mercato and a sustain.
It's kind of all of the above, and we do that actually not just with Mercury, but with a lot of especially our tuned percussion libraries. Mm-hmm. And maybe I'm not even sure where we first started doing that, but at least for the choirs, the utility there is you can go from an A to an U in a very smooth way. Right. Or if we got an A, U, and O legato vowel, you want to be able to go ah, ooh, oh, ah. Like you could kind of morph between them. And so those two, basically we call them layers, allow you to do that. You can crossfade between them. You can switch individually. Like you can say, I want to switch this articulation, but leave that one alone. Or they're independent. They have their own key switches, and you can automate them separately. It's really important. Yes, you could have those as separate instruments in your rack if you wanted to, but a lot of times you just want a smooth transition. You don't want to have to automate two different tracks. You want to be able to basically use one point of control to move around the instrument, or in this case of the choir. And you can also, it's awesome also for creating divisi sections. You can kind of separate the low end and the high end and have them kind of move independently of each other. So it's great for divisi, it's great for cross articulation, it's great for stacking too, just straight up, because you could turn off the crossfade feature and just have them both on and just adjust their volumes as you see fit. So you could do stacking, which is really kind of crucial for marcatos and a lot of staccatos, things like that, where you might want to, like with the brass, one of the things that people like to do is stack a decrescendo or a sforzando over a sustain, so you get a ba right at the start of the note that kind of then tapers down, but then you hold that steady with the sustain, and vice versa. You can use swells to lead into sustains, things like that.
That's cool.
Very cool.
It's for
the second thing that I really like about the Mercury Boys Choir is all of the sound design stuff. I mean, at the end, some of the lower patches, great. Those are the kind of things like, it almost sounds like an organ. Or those kind of things. So your libraries are really sound design heavy, and that of course comes from your sound design and video game background.
I mean, I think our video game background comes from more of that. I mean, that is more what got us into the whole thing, or got me into it. And Greg, very, very similarly, he was kind of a sound designer in the bands he was in for years, as just using lots of effects and lots of unique input tools and trying to see what you could do with sound and manipulate it. Basically pull it all apart and treat all audio as paint and see what you can do with it. So we, almost as a rule, every library we put out, we also take that same recorded acoustic content and manipulate it and create a bunch of atmospheres and pads and sustains and synths, just basically using various sound design techniques to take that natural sound and turning it into entirely different things. Partly for time-saving tools to be used, as is, or as either as is atmospheres, maybe in a video game, or just as an underscore, or used as chromatic instruments, but where you want kind of a synth sound, but you want it different, you want it to evolve or have some unique flavor. We also like it to serve as an inspiration for users to say, look what you can do. Don't hesitate to take what we've recorded and just fuck it all up. because that's what it is. It's paint, and let it be
Yeah.
paint. You know, don't just think, well, this is what it is. Well, what can it be? You
Yeah.
know.
Wonderful.
So
Well, we are getting kind of close to the end of our time here, and you have just been tremendous. This has been a fantastic
thank you.
interview to get really in depth about what you guys do at Soundiron. Can you tell me a little bit about the future? What do you see coming down the road for you guys?
Yeah. So right now we're working with Native Instruments on the next stage, the woodwinds. So we're
Yeah.
developing basically a companion to the brass and the string library they did with Audio Bro. The woodwinds will be very much in line with the brass, but it's a little bit more expansive in that we've got more sections. So there's the flutes, oboes. I hope I don't forget one as I'm reading or thinking these out. Bassoons, saxophones,
Ooh,
bass winds, and
clarinets.
clarinet.
I think.
Thank you. Yeah. Good. So 6 sections, and then soloists for each as well.
Wow.
Similar to the soloists that are in the Symphony series brass or in our choirs, it's got the soloists will have true legato and the long form style that you need to do with soloists, which is where you get this the
arc.
legato interval and then the sustain, because the fewer crossfade points you have, the less phasing and other issues can occur. It's a much more natural event. When you have a monophonic sound, essentially like a clarinet, it's not so easy to blend as it is with an ensemble. You have your ear is expecting to hear one instrument, so when you're crossfading, suddenly you're hearing 2, and so your ear tells you, wait a minute, I'm hearing a duet now. So it's very tricky to get that fade right, and you want to minimize those so that you have as much actual. It also means that it essentially functions as round robin because you have so much content, all these different sustains. So yeah, soloists, and basically we're expanding on that, and we've got some more things down the road along that line as well.
Cool.
We're planning right now a strings ensemble library, and yeah, we're developing that now. I think our goal is probably going to be more of a chamber orchestra sound, so not
That's
huge
becoming
sections.
vogue. Yeah, a lot of video games are doing that. Like BioShock Infinite, for example, they went that way, and I know Jason Graves did too in some of his more recent games. It's very possible to get really intense sounding, even battle scenes and so on, from a chamber orchestra.
Yeah.
So very cool.
And I listened to a lot of Philip Glass, and I think there was a Cronus Quartet collaboration with him, and then some other things that I had been hearing. I was like, oh, you know what, and I'd always really kind of preferred the close, kind of very present, warm sound of a chamber, string section. So it won't be, it'll be an ensemble, but it'll be very, very intimate in that way. So that's something we're in pre-production for. Woodwinds is in post-production now, so that's coming this year. Strings will probably be late this year, or maybe 2017 sometime.
Cool.
Things can change all the time because we are also kind of like ADD. We'll start developing something. Something will come up and be like, oh, we gotta get that. Like kind of deviate and everything kind of gets pushed back. But
there's all those cool sound design things that you have, all the horror sound effects and things like that. That must be a lot of fun
our annual 6 live. Every coming up on Halloween every year we just go to town on horror stuff because I can't get enough of it. We're already planning this coming year's horror. I think we're going to record. I got a chainsaw. We're going to see if we can turn that into a melodic instrument.
Oh, nice.
Awesome.
And I think we're so we got a lot of weird ideas, and it will probably have about a dozen, maybe more releases this year of that sort. So
speaking of your woodwinds and stuff, a couple questions on that. What made you decide to sample saxophones? Because I know some people are kind of like purists with them. They're like, yeah, we don't use saxophones, we orchestras. And other people are like, yeah, man, why aren't there more saxophones in orchestras? And so I'm just wondering, what do you just want to make sure you had that? Because as far as I know,
yeah, I mean, for the purists, you don't have to use it if you don't want to.
Have like classically sampled saxophones.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a purist like that, honestly, it's because when I was in band in high school and growing up, we always had saxophones, and it was just it never occurred to me that you wouldn't have a section of them. So yeah, I mean, there was all that gap that a lot of people aren't doing it, but I mean, it is called for and there is a need for it, and it sounded cool.
Yeah, definitely. I'm a
So,
big, I'm a fan of them. I'm not a hater.
mhm.
And
I mean,
then,
and the sax ensemble sounds great, and our
yeah,
sax players
definitely.
were really good. So the solo sax is also a really good portion of
And
it.
then my second question on that is this has to do with the ensemble series in general. How do you keep the RAM so low? Because like you have true legato
Right,
patches,
great
top
question.
patches, all of this, but the RAM size is very reasonable. And
Yeah.
is there you have a special technique for that?
Yeah, Chris is an evil wizard. Um,
Oh, cool. That
no,
is
so what he's doing is he's dynamically loading just the articulations you've picked. So with the slot system, the main idea was like, all right, so here are 8 slots. You can pick 8 different articulations and load them into RAM right now, and then instantly switch between them, no lag. But it's just the RAM you need for that preset. And if you need more articulations at at the ready, you can load multiple instances of the same preset and just load up the things you need. So, and still have a lot of control over what's going on. But
cool.
yeah, you have the slot system, and then the mic's positions. They load by default. It'll load our stereo master mix, which is what we think is like the most balanced mix. But then you could say, oh, I also want, or instead of that, I want this close mics, or I can stack the two, or I could choose the mid or the far. And as you're choosing those things, it's just loading only what you need.
Oh,
And
that's cool.
so
It's like pre-purged for you.
yeah, and then we use DFD really effectively. I think we um, by just pre-buffering the content, the amount of content we need to allow for
Yeah.
the offset range control. Um,
Cool.
so that's kind of the way that it all. And then we just we think strategically from the beginning of building a preset, like how do we want to group this stuff? How do we want to handle it so that we aren't overloading the user's resources?
Cool.
Great. That's a great question because I noticed that too. Is like, I'm used to loading libraries and, you're seeing your RAM count just go through the roof. But on yours, it was, I think, the whole brass library was with just the defaults without a lot of extra things, maybe 8 or so gig, something like that. It was pretty
Yeah,
lean.
and the library itself is actually with NCW.
I believe
was
it's 26
like,
gigs, but I'm not positive.
Yeah.
yeah,
So you're able to keep what's in RAM at any time really down. That's awesome.
yeah, and that's
29.07 gigs.
for the full Symphony series brass and solo, or just the ensemble.
Just the ensemble.
Yeah, and I mean it's a lot bigger than that. I mean it's NCW losslessly compressed, but
Yeah.
yeah. So it's a big library, but we were kind of given the task. Soundiron, or I mean, Native Instruments really wanted. So, like, could you guys keep it under a gig per patch? And we're like, do better than that. I think we could do better than that. And so our goal was less than a half gig each. I mean, some go bigger because they have to.
Mhm.
There's just so much stuff, but
Wow.
our goal was to try to see if we could keep it under a half gig for a full, for the full main sort of everything preset for each section.
Awesome. So the last thing I want to say is probably a little bit of a plug for you guys. The Omega, amazing deal. I mean, it's like $5,500 worth of libraries for $1,000 essentially. Plus, you get 10 years of 50% off of all of your libraries. I mean, that.
Yeah, any new releases we come out after that, even updates. Like you basically everything is it's basically a membership without any dues. Once you've signed up for Omega, that's it. You're a member, and you can get any new release we offer. The only things that aren't in the Omega bundle are their contact player libraries. We have 7 of those, including the Series Brass. But as a Omega member, you can pick any of those up at half price. And any new releases that come out after you get Omega, you just get to pick them up.
That's
so there's
amazing.
not like there's not like major updates where you have to wait a year and then buy an update. It's more like what do you want? What don't you want? You can pick and choose as you go from that point on. Which instruments are right for you, because we cover so much ground. We do conventional instruments, and then we do some weird stuff, and then we do everything in between. So people can kind of pick and choose as they want.
Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time. We really appreciate it. It has been fascinating and really interesting to get in depth with some of these libraries, and we're looking forward to putting up on the site some full and in-depth reviews of each one of them as well.
Thank you very much. It was awesome to talk to you guys.
You too.
Thanks so much.
Thanks.
All right.
See ya.
Yeah,
Yeah.
bye.
Thank you for listening to the Designing Music Now podcast, a podcast dedicated to the craft of creating music for video games and interactive media. Please visit us at designingmusicnow.com for more info, news, and reviews on this subject. We would love to hear from you.